All right, let's go and get it started then, shall we? Hello, everyone. My name is Logan Hicks. I am going to be your moderator for this session. This session is titled Inspections 101, Pre-Inspection Checks and Pre-Inspections Checks and Inspections. So if you guys have any questions during the presentation or afterwards, feel free to use that Q&A button at the bottom, send us your questions, and we'll get to them at the end. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce the speaker. We have Claudia Akroyd. She is a construction inspector with Bowers & Kubota Consulting. She is the Department of Transportation Highways Division's independent inspector for contract construction projects and has worked in the stormwater program for the DOT for over 13 years. She'll be discussing several categories of common mistakes found during a construction BMP inspection. Please help me and welcome me, Claudia Akroyd. Good afternoon, Claudia.
Thanks, Logan. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll just skip these first two. Before we go any further, for anyone who wasn't in my earlier presentation, I want to point out that the Construction Best Management Practices Field Manual has been revised. And as of October 1st of this year, it is to be used for all projects regardless of when they started. It is available for download at stormwaterhawaii.com. Go to resources, contractors, and then look for the manual listed with October 2021. It's also available download from the website for this conference in one of the download sections. What I'm going to cover is what I look for in the SWP, and then a little bit about how to survive an inspection. When I go through a SWP, and I do read these from cover to cover, not the most exciting reading in the world, but still read it. I'm looking for the permits to include any 401 and 404s, the certification, looking for Acreage Disturbed, drainage maps, which include the outfalls, whether or not the project has any impaired waters, because that will affect the revegetation of the area. I look to see if there's a buffer zone requirement. If it's a long project or even different sites, I look for BMP phasing. I'll check for staging areas, and I'll also check for a solid waste disclosure form. First off, there are two types of SWPs. One, there are two types of templates for SWPs. One is for permitted SWPs, and the other is for non-permitted SWPs. So there is a template for each one. Permits are required to be part of the SWP. This includes your NGPC, including the NOI to get the form. If you have 41404, they need to be included. If your project calls for other permits, such as dewatering or hydro testing, those permits also need to be included. Now, you need to read all these permits because the 401, 404 often contains some specific language specific to your project. For example, we had two bridges that were close together, Punulu'u and Kahana Bridge, being constructed around the same time. One required a turbidity barrier to be in at the start of construction and stay in through the entire project. The other one, they were only installed at a certain point. Stuff specific to your project. Dewatering permits often require a dewatering plan. Now, every SWP has to have a certification. This is required by Appendix A of 1155. And it's, your amendments also have to have the same certification. Now, how you certify amendments, different offices have used different methods. Some have put the SWP amendment at the top of the certification page, and others have just added the amendments underneath. But they must be present in order for that amendment or that SWP to be considered valid. I mentioned I look for acreage disturbed. On the right is a definition of disturbed disturbed area per HAR 1155. I call your attention to resurfacing or pavement. The only time this is considered disturbance is when you're exposing the base course, bare soil, or ground surface. If you're just milling and filling, it is not considered ground disturbance. And we've had a few SWPs come through that are non-permitted SWPs. And I look at the project area, and for instance, in this one, initially it said 7.25 acres. So I said, where's your permit? Oh, we're not disturbing anything. We just have a small staging area. Folks, notice that right above, if an area is 1 acre or more, it will trigger an MPDS permit. So make sure you're just including your disturbed acre. And I'll talk a little bit more about staging area acreage. I'm looking for drainage maps or an outfall maps. This is critical determining if an area drains to impaired waters. You have to look at where everything goes. The impaired waters are listed in the DOH website, Clean Water Branch. You can get the drainage map and outfalls from the AMS system or asset management system. This can be gotten through the DOT resident offices if they can get access to that system. You need to have the flow direction required on the plan sheets, and I'm going to give you some examples of various formats. This is a discharge map for the poly highway, as it turns out. Notice it has all the inlets and greens, the outfalls, and it shows where some of the discharge points are. And you go to the right, and in that, you have discharge points 1 to 3, and in here, 5 to 10 are discharging to impaired waters. That means any disturbance in that area will have to be stabilized within 7 days when disturbance has ceased. Here's another example of a discharge map. In this particular case, they printed it out not only with the PID numbers, but underneath them, there's a blue number. That blue number corresponds to an inventory number for drain cleaning. That number is painted in red on each inlet. And again, it shows where the outfall is. Here's an extremely good example of drainage and flow in a project area. Number one, you have these blue squiggle lines on the schematic. That shows the direction of flow. This is showing you where it's going to in terms of the inlets. Number two, this is something we don't often see, but it's very helpful. This line is showing you which direction the flow goes underground from inlet to inlet. Number three is a disturbed area. Now, depending on what they're actually doing in the disturbed area may trigger number four, that inlet, which is outside the exact project limits, may need to be protected. Projects, when you look at a project, you can't just look at it starts at point A and ends at point B, and 5 feet from point B, if there's an inlet, you may need to provide protection for that because you're responsible for anything leaving the site. Talk a little bit about buffer zones. We're running into these more and more often. This is where you have a project within 50 feet of what's considered state waters. You need to provide a natural buffer zone at 50 feet and sediment control, not just the buffer zone. You need to provide sediment control also. When you cannot have a natural buffer zone of 50 feet, You may need to put double sediment control or double perimeter control, spaced 5 feet apart. In the SWPPs, when it talks about the buffer zones, there are several exceptions given. It is not automatic to check the box that says it's exempted because it's a linear project. We have linear projects that do require buffer zones. So take a hard look at that. The fact that you check the box doesn't mean you don't have to put it in. It just means you erroneously checked the box. And I'll give you an example. But first, let's talk about where you measure the water. It's a high water point, not the point where it is when you're just looking at it. You have to look at where the highest reach of the wave is. And this is at high tide. You even need to consider the highest wash of the waves, and that's definition includes king tides. Give you an example of a project that requires buffer zones. This is Leeward Bike Path. It's a bike path being constructed in existing right of way. However, it does go through right by a marsh, which is a wildlife sanctuary. Here you can see the water out. Oops, sorry about that. You can see the water out here. There is a natural 50-foot buffer zone in between. They have their sediment protection. Here they've started to install their BMPs. This is when it was pretty wet, so you can see where the high water mark is. They installed their secondary perimeter protection 5 feet from the first. Now, the fact that the water has receded and has been receded for months doesn't mean they don't consider where the high water mark is. I want to talk about the BMPs and the BMP plan in the SWPPP. What is presented in the big documents is not a full BMP plan. You can't just take that, turn it around, slap it in your SWPPP and submit it. You're going to be putting a lot more stuff in because that's minimal. It's designed to give an idea. Everything that you install or everything is either installed or you phase the BMP installation. And the construction schedule, the 3-week schedule, or even the project total schedule is not a phasing plan. It must be spelled out in the SWPPP. You need to provide information and what's going to be used in the installation instructions. The SWPPP is a standalone document. Anything you think you might be going to use on the SWPPP, stuff it into the SWPPP. If you are going to say in your SWPPP, you say your staging area will have silt fence around it, and that's it. That's all you can do until you make an amendment. And that has to be approved and signed prior to the implementation of changing out the BMP. Here's an example of what was in the bid documents. This is a culvert repair. What they had was a biosock at the inlet and the outlet. That was it. These things are quite a ways from the road. There was also a statement that proposed BMP is to show general intent. Contractor shall submit BMP plan for review and approval. This is not a sufficient BMP plan. What were they going to do? Drop an excavator on the apron and then pick it up by helicopter? They had to get there. This is the actual sites of the inlet and the outlet. As you can see, there was a lot more disturbance that needed to be considered besides one biosock at the entrance and the outfall. In the SWIP, there was a statement, all perimeter sediment controls and inlet protection BMPs will be installed prior to construction. Everything's in or it's phased. And once you install it, it must be maintained. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to install 8 miles worth of BMPs for a paving project if you're not going to get to mile 8 for 10 months. You need to provide a phasing plan in the SWIP. And it can be by site or it can be by section, but it must be spelled out in the SWIP. I would suggest you also include criteria for removal. It saves another amendment. But note, the removal is a decision by the project engineer or DOT based on specific criteria. It's not a contractor decision of their own volition. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about staging areas. And that includes staging areas, lay down yards, base yards, stockpile area. We're going to call them all staging areas. Your locations need to be identified in the SWIP. And the SWIP must allow stock and spoil piles if you're going to have them. In other words, if you put not applicable in the tables for stockpiles, you're not doing stockpiles on your project. If you don't have an area specified, you must amend the SWIP. And the area must be included in the project disturbed area. And this is cumulative. If you're going to have 3 staging areas, all 3 staging areas must be included. It doesn't mean that you open one, close it down, and therefore you don't count that area. It's cumulative, whether they're open or not. You need to include a layout of the staging area. Here's some example. You've got a Google map showing the general layout in the area, and you've got a schematic showing how the staging area is going to be laid out and what BMPs are going to be installed. If you're doing a paving project, for example, that's very long and linear, you can, and you're going to keep moving the staging area along, have the same general layout, you can include a general layout in the plan. If the areas are not specifically identified when you develop your SWIP, you must amend it to show where the staging areas are going to be. If they're not already included in the acreage to the project, that acreage must be added and could trigger another permit. So be cognizant of your staging areas, especially if you have a project that's 0.99 acres and you have a 0.21 acre staging area. Make sure you keep it a 0.21 acre staging area. Don't let it balloon. Otherwise, you're going to have to go for a permit. In talking about solid waste disclosure forms, any waste you have in the project, you have to designate it where it's going to go. It is also owned by that project, cradle to grave. The fact that you give it to you, you're responsible for it. In this case, this is a paving project, and they say that stuff is going to West Oahu Aggregate or Hawaiian Earth Products, PVT, or taken back to the plant for reclaimed material. Okay, Talking about inspection steps, this is what I do before I go out. I read the SWP, all the permits and amendments. When I go out, I'll meet with the DOT project staff. I ask them what the project is, make sure I understand what they're doing. What are they working on now? I will check on-site documents. Now, I check DOT documents. It's up to DOT to check contractor documents. DOH comes out, they can check everybody's documents. When I first go out, I look for a pre-construction verification inspection report done by TOT. This is required before DOT can allow the contractor to start work. Start of work by the contractor is triggered by DOT approval, not when the contractor decides, oh, I'm going to start. Since technically I'm inspecting the state projects and their inspection procedures, it's up to DOT project staff if the contractor will be included in the inspection. That's fine and dandy by me, and a lot of times the contractor knows why something's going on or why something's not working that may have just happened and DOT doesn't know about it. I'll walk the site looking at BMP placement and topography. I take pictures of good and bad. Then I outbrief the project staff. This is the date of notification and starts the clock. The correction clock, not when the report's received. You know, I tried to write up and transmit the inspection report the same day. These are areas requiring an inspection. Basically anything cleared, graded, excavated. In other words, all the disturbed areas, stormwater controls that are installed. I'll look at the topography and look at areas where sediment and other pollutants have accumulated or deposited. I'll look to where stormwater typically flows. I'll look at the point of discharge from the site, even if it's not raining. This is something you need to periodically check in your reports, not just when it's raining. And you need to know where your discharge points are. If DOH comes out for an inspection, they're going to ask you, where's your discharge point? You better know where it is. Be able to take them there. Location where stabilization methods have been initiated. And it can be pouring down rain. I get a call, are you still coming? The answer is yes. Best time to inspect a project is when it's raining. That's when you see what is working and what is not. Some pre-inspection tips. Walk the site, check the BMPs. This is best done the day before. A lot of deficiencies that I find could be corrected within 5 minutes. Ideally, you get to quarterly inspection. With that, it means you have less than a total of 6 minor deficiencies, no major, no critical in a 3-month period, which means in any 1 month, you cannot have 3 minors. If I go and there's a gravel bag at a curb inlet guard broken, there is a perimeter biosock with a hole in it. Silt fence that is broken loose from the ties. That are 3 things that could quickly be corrected. But if I find those 3 things, it just kicked you out of quarterly inspection. Fix the simple stuff. If something is kind of major, have a crew start the repair. If the repairs aren't done before the inspector gets there, bring and complete it during the inspection. Bring the inspector back to see it, correct it. It may not save you from having a deficiency listed in the report, but it will show in the report that it was corrected during the inspection. When you're doing an inspection, lay on a crew or have someone available that can call the crew to come and start the repairs while the inspection is going on. This gets you brownie points with any inspector. Good intentions go a long way. Have an inspection strategy. What are you going to do if an inspector walks in? Now, pretty much everybody's used to me coming, so we have our own little flow. But what happens if DOH walks on your site? And they can walk on with as cold or with a few minutes notice. You want to be upbeat. Don't be rolling your eyes and saying, oh, that I don't have time for this. That just kind of torques the inspector off. Be prepared for an inspection every day. Have an inspection strategy. How are you going to take them through the site? That inspector will want to see the entire site. How are you going to flow that makes the most sense to get the most areas? Document the inspection along with whoever is doing the inspection. Take pictures and notes. If they take a picture, you take a picture, especially if it's a deficiency. If DOH says something isn't right, don't argue with them. Don't be afraid to ask questions, but don't argue with them. They know what they're doing. If you have problems on a site, talk to the inspector. They have seen a lot of projects and might be able to help you brainstorm ideas of how to solve that problem. Be upfront and honest. Don't make excuses. Sometimes somebody will say something that they think the inspector wants to hear and instead of wrong, and the inspector will often know about it. So correct it, stuff that's wrong as soon as possible. Document corrections, take pictures of the correction. This is especially critical if DOH comes out and sends you a notice of violation. If they told you something is wrong, you took a picture and then you corrected it, take another picture of the correction. As soon as it's correction, correct it. And try to make sure there's a date time stamp on the photo. That way, when you get the report, all you got to do is haul that picture out, slap it on the report, say, we repaired it that afternoon, you were here, here's the picture. Don't tell the inspector what you think you want to hear. I had a case where they told me what they thought I wanted to hear, and it got them in this serious hot water because I asked how the dirt got in the drain. Did it fall off when they opened up the drain? And they said, oh no, we hauled all the dirt off the drain before we went down in. And okay, you got a critical. If they told me when they moved the fabric it had dropped in, I would said, fine, I'll be back in a few minutes, clean it out. Instead, it got everybody all excited, running around for a couple hours before they finally fessed up that they dropped the dirt, the mud in the drain. And second, don't wait for the inspector to come and tell you something is wrong. Fix it, own the problem, and own the solution. Even if it's wrong, you get credit for having tried to fix it. But if you wait to see what I'm going to say or some other inspector is going to say, that's just not effective site management. Questions?
Oh, thank you, Claudia. We do have one question in the Q&A bar so far. It's would SCAP be among the other permits to be included in the SWPPP?
I need a definition of what SCAP is. I don't recognize that acronym.
I just tried looking. I tried Googling it. I didn't find anything. So, if whoever asked the question, if you could, give us a definition, that'd be a little bit better for us. But if anybody has any other questions, like I said, use the Q&A bar at the bottom.
No.
Stream channel alteration permit.
I would say it probably should be included because if we're probably talking about a stream or bridge project that has probably got a 404 or 401 on it. But I've never seen one of those, so I couldn't tell you.
All right. Well, I think that's all question-wise.
Okie dokie.
Well, thank you, everyone, for attending this. Thank you again, Claudia, as well. That concludes our sessions. We have the final session of the top story hour happening at 3 o'clock. So don't forget to visit one of the DOT public education booths to get your conference certificate. Also, the post-conference questionnaire will be available following the last session, and that's worth 500 points. So make sure to get that going. Oh, one more question actually popped up here. Any suggestions to get information to the MTX people ASAP?
What's the MTX people?
I'm not entirely sure. Maintenance.
I don't work with maintenance or the airport division, so I can't answer that one.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that would be all then. Thank you guys very much. Like I said, fill out that post-conference questionnaire, and we will be good. Oh, is the survey on the menu bar? The survey for the post-conference is actually in the it's actually in the tab at the top of the homepage there. It'll be at the very right-hand side. It says survey, and there's got a little bus next to it. So if anybody would like to fill that out, it's there. All right. Thank you guys very much. Thank you, Claudia, again. You guys all have a great day.
Bye-bye.